We might not want them all.
All right, awesome. Rick, you all set?
Yes, sir.
All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the March 19th meeting of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Planning Commission's Planning Committee. All right, awesome. Rick, you all set?
Yes, sir.
All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the March 19th.
Yep.
Good to go? All right. All right. Well, that all being said, we are meeting in room 280 in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Government Center. And this meeting is also being live streamed for anyone that wasn't able to join us in person on the Charlotte Planning Department's YouTube page, Facebook page, one of the two. Which one? YouTube page. Let's jump right into it. I know we're a few minutes behind. We'll begin with introductions, starting with our commissioners on my left.
Rick Winokur, Planning Commission.
Aaron Shaw, Planning Commission.
Courtney Rhodes, Planning Commission.
Melissa Gaston, Planning Commission.
Yeah, staff are seated around the dais as well, please.
Erin Henson, planning staff.
Kathy Cornett, Planning staff.
Zania Duhaney, Planning staff.
Alicia Osborne, planning staff.
All right, thank you all very much. First thing on the agenda, assuming everyone has had a few minutes to review the minutes from our previous February 20th meeting. If anybody has any questions or comments, please let us know. And if not, I will go ahead and take a motion, please.
Motion to approve.
I second that, Melissa Gaston.
All right, motion by Commissioner Shaw, second by Commissioner Gaston. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, next we have 5 mandatory referrals this evening. Would anybody like to pull any of these for additional comment? I believe we have everybody seated around to answer questions as we have some. Yeah, open the floor.
I have a few questions on mandatory referral 24-10.
Okay, do we have comments or just some questions?
Just some questions.
Yeah, let's go for it.
So, and I apologize, this might be me as a novice, but is there a developer identified for the transfer or is this being executed as a purchase of the land, or I was just trying to understand a little bit better the transaction, or maybe there's not a transaction at this point yet.
Do we have Jason or Roberta here, or somebody from the county that can answer those? If you wouldn't mind just coming up to the dais and turning one of those mics on, that'd be great. Thank you very much. And please introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, Roberta Whitner, Mecklenburg County Real Estate. Commissioner Shaw, to answer your question, we do have a selected developer. The county issued a request for proposals back in 2020. And so we have identified Dream Key Partners as one of the developers on this project.
And so will the site, I'm assuming there's some price associated with the transfer of the land.
So actually with this particular site, there's several transactions going to take place. The majority of the site will be ground leased, and a portion of the site will be conveyed fee simple, but that is not for fair market value, if that makes sense.
Yes.
They're going to convey the parcels for the for sale component, as well as the spine road to connect the sites.
That does make sense. Thank you.
Yep.
And any proceeds from that, is there like an allocated budgeted place that those funds flow, or does it just sort of go into the income pot for next year, or how do those get allocated within the county?
Yeah, so with these transactions, we will not receive any proceeds. There will not be any proceeds for sale at all.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you, Roberta. Does anybody else have any questions, comments, concerns on the mandatory referrals, this evening? All right, if not, I think we're ready to make a motion to approve. Only comment from me is Jonathan, thanks for being here. It's nice to see kind of the results from our last month's meeting being put into action with this mandatory referral. On that note, we can go ahead and take a motion for no additional comment.
This is Commissioner Gaston. When the planning committee reviewed mandatory referral reports 24-07, 24-08, 24-09, 24-10, and 24-11 on March 19th, 2024, and have no additional comments for the submitting agency.
Can we get a second, please?
Second.
All right, motion by Commissioner Gaston, second by Commissioner Shaw. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you very much. Kathy, just to confirm for the community area planning update, we don't need, there are no motions, there's no action items there?
It's just, no presentation, just.
Okay, great. Well, in that case, we're very happy to have Dr. Douglas Shoemaker with the University of North Carolina, Charlotte here this evening. He will be giving us a presentation on, as the title says, the evidence of impact for urban growth, access, and heat in a future Charlotte. Dr. Shoemaker, would you prefer, a lot of times we'll go through the presentation, we can save questions for the end. Do you want us to just kind of ask them as they come up? What's best for you?
Oh, great. I'm mic'd. Both ways work. I have a lot of material, so there's, I can see a reason to break in and ask some questions, and I invite that. I can think on my feet. But hopefully at the end of it, there might be some other pieces that you would like to discuss, and I'm open for that too. So
Great. We'll tell you what, if we have any burning questions, we'll let you know. If not, we'll try and hold them to the end. And again, thank you so much for being here.
well, it's my pleasure. Again, my name is Doug Shoemaker. I'm the Director of Research and Outreach at the Center for Applied GIS at UNC Charlotte. I am a land systems scientist, so I use science and the interpretation of satellite and aerial data to try to understand what's happening in landscapes. I titled this presentation Evidence of Impact because I realize this committee has to make often decisions with less than perfect information. And one of the things that I seek to do with my work, and which is almost 20 years of work, and I'll be doing a survey of a couple pieces that I think are relevant to this group. But what I've tried to do is use historical data and modeling, spatial modeling, to provide evidence about why it might be a good thing to do in the future or to evaluate decision making. So that's my reasoning. And before we go in, I just would like to establish a few, I'm likely to use some academic jargon, so I'd like to bring you along on a few simple things. One is, I'll talk about ecosystem services. So these are this is a concept where we can put a price on the provisioning and regulation services that natural ecosystems provide. So bring it into all the things that we take from nature: clean air, clean water, materials. And when we put a dollar sign on it, then we understand that when we get into trade-offs, that there are no free rides. That if we develop, let's say, green fields, because they're great places to live, because the soil is good, and we're going to cap that and put a house on it, we're losing that somewhere else. So there's no free rides. An accounting balance sheet should allow us to bring that in and let us to evaluate how things are going to play out over time. And in the case of a lot of development, we're working on borrowed time because we're slowly degrading the things that we're doing because of our development practices. And then this final piece might be the easiest or the hardest one to get your head wrapped around. And we would call this emergence or emergent pattern. So the little GIF that you're seeing here is Las Vegas, Nevada, from 85 to I think 2015. And you'll see that the complexion of that city changes dramatically and it's at 1 pixel at a time. So when we're trying to understand what to do with a plot or a parcel, it seems to be disconnected from everything else when we make that decision. And that's an important thing to do, of course, but we also must realize that it aggregates with other decisions that are made to convert a greenfield into something else. And that leaves us with patterns. Could be patterns of loss, could be urban growth. And we're going to look at both of those things in this presentation. All right, everybody kind of with me? So this first piece of work I'd like to describe was sort of a seminal study that we did in the late 2000s, automatically advanced, that got us into the business of understanding what our city is going to look like in the future. So we all know that our city has had extremely rapid growth since the 1990s, and a lot of it is this dispersed style that we would call sprawl. Along with it, we're getting all these pieces of evidence that not all is well in terms of resilience. Traffic congestion is one of those things. But even closer to my world, thinking about natural systems, we have increased flash flooding. We have degraded waterways. And this lets us know that things are changing. And the main drivers of that are strong and unlikely to change. Our city is one of the fastest growing in the nation, and we're anticipating over the next 10 years to grow by another 19% in population. So enormous change. So we wanted to see, how is our city physically growing? And how we did that was we first recorded the history of Charlotte as seen by the Landsat satellite system. So this thing's been flying over the earth, taking pictures since the 1970s. And we were able to look at Charlotte in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s. And with some image analysis techniques, start to get it, be able to make an image like this, which shows a pervious surface. So a pervious surface is a surface that characterized by concrete, asphalt, shingle, asphalt, compacted earth. If a raindrop falls from the sky and hits it, that raindrop is not going to get absorbed into the soil. It's going to roll and need to be collected by some sort of gray infrastructure that's hauling off stormwater, right? And so we're able to map that for each of those time steps. And I'll show you the formula. From that, we can see the change at each time step. We're able to create sort of a heat map of what's likely to get changed next. All right. So things, and you can see Mecklenburg County is in the center and Charlotte's in the very center. And we can see the things that are red are highly likely to develop over the next few steps. Blue, less so. And when we go ahead and use some modeling, we can create animations like this, which will predict where that's going to happen over time. So the first 76, 85, 96, those are 2000, all historic. And then now we're into projections of growing in. And I'll give you the details. But what we found when we did this modeling was pretty interesting. Out of all the 25 variables that we looked at, the ones, this one wants to auto advance, that were transportation networks were highly influenced where new development was going to go in. Distance to urban centers, things that are out in the countryside are less likely to convert than things that are closer to the city. The idea of development pressure, if you're an unbuilt plot or site near something that's developing, you're much more likely to change also over the next few time steps. Terrain slope gradient, that simply means things that are unbuildable slopes are not going to get built, so we can kind of hold those off. And distance to interchanges, when we put in a highway interchange, at those interchanges, we see a lot of new development. We've seen that through the county, especially with improvements to 77 and the opening of 485. And from that, we're able to make a series, if we just focus on Mecklenburg County, we're able to walk through Green is natural and rural, so that also is farmland. Yellow is developed. Purple is protected open space. So these are things that we could identify as having an easement on it or being parkland. So this is the picture that sort of made it into the newspaper and gave us that finding that things that weren't protected by 2030, we're only going to have about 3% of our land left to work with, our green space left at that. And of course, this story made the front page of the Observer in 2008. We're erasing all our green, really changed the dialogue in the city about where we were going, got us thinking about things a bit differently. And these maps were used by different nonprofits to help pass the 2008 land acquisition bond referendum, which something I'm very proud of. So that whole study is talking about using these techniques to understand where we're going, all right? Now, if you have an understanding about how your city is going to grow into the future, we can start to do a lot of interesting things. And one of these things is sort of intersect our greenway network or our proposed greenway network with where people are and see how they intersect. So this is this map, and you'll see this will go through, is our expected population distribution from 2010 to 2030. So the advantages that we're seeing here, a lot of times when you look at population maps, it's done by census blocks. So you get one uniform piece and everything in it is supposed to have the same amount of population. Well, with GIS, geographic information science techniques, we can do things like make sure we don't represent population in green spaces or undeveloped spaces. And we can start to understand there's different amounts of density. And you can see by this final step, let's see if it goes through, the dark browns are going to be the densest places in the city, all right? So we've got that. And Greenways from Mecklenburg asked me, they said, listen, we've got these great plans to build out this network of greenways throughout the county. Tell me what you think about those. And what I did was I took my population maps and I looked at access to those greenways by population centers, right? So are the trails going where the people are, right? And so around each one of these trails, so the trail comes at different phases, and I matched up the population with the date that they were supposed to be built. And we've got 3 little bubbles around each one. One is a 1/4 mile walking distance. Of course, planners often use that as a measure of is walkability. Is this a neighborhood park? Should generally be within a 1/4 mile. The second ring is a 1/2 mile. So this is something you could take a long walk or a bike ride to. And then this third ring is a full mile away. And if we looked at what we had in 2015, if we put it on a bar chart, we find that probably 5 or 6% of the county's residents were within walking distance of a greenway. All right, kind of surprising. Less than 20% within a 1/2 mile, and maybe 35% within a full mile. So the next phase, according to plans, we're supposed to come in 2025. When we intersect it with the population projections, we actually see that despite putting in a lot more greenway, we're actually still holding the same proportion. So we're adding greenway, but we're not adding access. We're holding access at the same relative measure. This pattern repeats for 2030. And in fact, it's only until we get to a complete vision, which we didn't really have, is not completely, funded and planned out. Only then do we start to get real improvements in access to the greenways. So my take home from this is we're being very convenient about where we locate our greenways, and we're not building them to where we think people are. And so I really think there could be a lot of improvement. So canopy and urban heat. Canopy has been in the news quite a bit lately. And what I'd like to bring your attention to is the problem of urban heat really needs to be on your radar. So this is kind of a shocker that heat kills more Americans than flooding, tornadoes, and hurricanes combined. All right. That's a shocker, and I'll come back to this slide. So we know that heat has very real human impacts. And if we look at the projections for what heat are going to be like in the region, the story is not good. You know, historically, through the 80s, 90s, 2000s, our average temperature in Mecklenburg County was about 59 degrees. From 2040 going forward, we're supposed to be 65 degrees. And that's for the year. So that's summer, winter, the whole 9 yards. This is really amazing. It used to be we'd have about 6 days a year where it'd be over 95. We're anticipating a full 2 months of heat over 95 degrees as soon as 2040. And these projections, by what we're seeing today, actually might be a little conservative. So that's what's coming, right? And if we go back and we think of why does heat kill more than floods and storms, well, we've got safety nets built in for those two things. We have building codes that make sure houses stay up. We've got FEMA floodplain map to help make sure that we don't put houses in the wrong place. We've got weather reports that tell people what to do. But when it comes to heat, it's every man for themselves. I mean, particularly how maybe after we see what we're expecting in the city, you're absolutely dependent on an electronic appliance, you know, an air conditioner. And during extreme heat events, everybody's now reliant on the electric grid, and heaven forbid that goes down, right? Because we don't have a backup plan. So, in fact, if we talk about this pervasive heat, and we call these things urban heat islands. Now, the arrows point towards areas, well, kind of suburban areas where we have mixed tree canopy. The coolest areas are the one with the trees. So time and time again, it comes up, the only climate adaptation that's scalable at this point is keeping trees or putting in trees. It's the only one, right? And when we sub in a mix of impervious surfaces associated with suburban or commercial development, the temperature goes up. And then when you get to a city center where there's very few trees, that makes it the very hottest place of all. So why do trees work, right? So, you know, the basic science here is solar radiation is coming down. It's getting intercepted by the trees. And the trees are actually using that light to create photosynthesis. And in doing so, they're pulling water up out of the ground. And that water is transpiring through the leaves, and it creates an air conditioning effect, transpiration cooling. All right. At the same time, it's now shading parts of the ground so they don't get that batter of heat that they would give off later. So they're getting a shade. And in pre-development, you know, our sun beats down, the trees reflect a lot, and there's moderate heat that comes up from the land. But when we build something, we add impervious surface and we take the trees out, the same solar radiation, much less is reflected, and we get much heat back into where people live. So you can look at a satellite image like a Landsat picture that we have here on the left, and there's thermal bands, and we can get an estimate of what the ground temperatures are. For this project, I took a single day in August 2018 at noon and made a heat map of it. So in the map, the places that are red are literally hotter. We can see Uptown, we can see the airport. Areas that go from blue-green to blue are cooler. The gradient is very sharp. You can actually get 10 degrees hotter within 50 feet of a tree, all right? And then when I plotted the temperature for each of the 144 Zillow neighborhoods in our city, we get correspondence where the heat tracks incredibly neatly with how much trees are there. So neighborhoods with less trees are up here on it. So less trees, higher temperatures. So the red line is average. Things above it are hotter. Things below it are cooler. Neighborhoods over here with 50 and 60% canopy cover, cooler than the norm. All right, we'll come back to this. It makes a big difference. But what's going on with our canopy? So back in 2012, we had our first sort of agreement that we wanted to do 50% canopy cover by 2050. And back then, we were at 47%. It was only a few percentage points away. And groups like Tree Charlotte were created with the goal of planting our way out of this problem. Not about protection, but about planting. We're going to plant a lot of trees. But when we revisited this in 2018, and this study was done by the University of Vermont Spatial Analysis Lab, which was probably like the gold standard for this kind of work, we found that we were down to 45. So we had lost quite a bit, approximately 1 million trees over since 2012, which translates to about 3 football fields of trees a day. How do you even know this, right? So you can look at an aerial. Here's Still Creek in 2012. And if you look at the yellow circle, we could see undeveloped land that's got lots of nice trees on it. We revisit this in 2018 with the same aerial shot, and that forest is gone except for a little chunk, and there's houses in there, new development. You can do a little math between the two pictures, and what you have in red are losses. Now, the algorithms and the computers are so good, it's hard to see, but you can also see this green. Green is where we added. So trees, you know, Charlotte grows trees like nobody's business. We've got great soils for it, we got plenty of water, and we're growing. So there's this balance sheet where we're clawing back a little bit with new growth, and we're taking out big chunks. That's moving the balance sheet in the wrong direction. Now, when I was asked what's going on now by the Charlotte Observer and others, I did a quick study that showed that by 2021, we were down to under 44%. And that's with quite a slowing due to the pandemic. We had, for a couple years, much less activity, and we still lost 4% over that period. So overall, the pictures were sort of hemorrhaging trees. Of course, this contrasts quite a bit with a recent study from Planet Geo that was funded by Tree Charlotte and the city, which showed we were over 47% and that our tree cover was mostly stable. I think anybody that goes around town can see that's a tough pill to swallow. And of course, I weighed in on that as a skeptic because I don't think that's right. So where do we lose these trees? Over 2/3 of our canopy is in private lands and in residential areas, right? And the loss is usually in 2 ways. Here's Cherry, Dilworth. This is just south of the metropolitan, right? And if we take and look at an area down here, we have lots of little chunks of red. So those are losses. And these can be attributed to storm damage, natural mortality, things just dying. or trees that are removed for public safety. And that's about 60% of our losses. And there's an excellent chance that with climate change, we have accelerated storm damage and natural mortality. Hasn't been studied enough. The other type, the other third, are infill development. So here's on the corner of, is that Park? Where we can, you know, a lot of the development that's coming up in town are taking out big chunks and not replacing them. And so we lost there in Dilworth a nice section of forest. But hold on, man, don't trees just grow back? So Davy Resource Group, Davy Tree has a center right here in South Charlotte where they do some great work. And they looked at 3 different locations and asked just that question. If we have a new development, are things going to go back? So here's Rhea Farms off Railroad. And in 2014, I think it was an old golf course, and it had chunks of forest. And it was developed in 2016. And all that orange are forests that have been removed. So it's essentially brought back to a bare site. So pre-development, when you graph this, pre-development was 26% forest cover, noting that it was a golf course. During development, it got reduced to only 7%. And then there was an initial planning of 974 trees to get us back. Now, based on how fast trees grow, the best that site will ever get back to is 17% cover. Same dealio right across the street, Waverly. 56% initial cover, taken down to 0 during the development. They took everything out. They replanted 2% or 428 trees. Over time, by 2046, they only anticipate 3% tree canopy there. Current development trends resist reforestation. Final case, Riverbend, similar story where we had 68 at the beginning. We took it down to 10. We did the minimum required replanting of trees. And if we play it out to 2046, well, that site will at best have 13% tree canopy. So the way that we're developing right now is going to make it impossible to approach any sort of canopy goals with a replanting strategy. We've got to actually start saving what's there. What would it take to get back? So if we take that first case where tree loss due to storm damage, windfall, natural mortality, we'd have to plant about 35,000 trees per year to get back to that 2012 level where we put the stake in the sand, right? The bad news is the current capacity of Tree Charlotte in the city to plant trees is somewhere between 5,000 to 7,000 per year. I mean, nowhere, not a contender. Similar, if we go to those places where we entitle the taking of trees and we plant that back, that's going to take over 58,000 trees to get it back to just where it was in 2012 for our region. And again, we can only plant 5,000 to 7,000 trees a year. So it's not looking good. Davey went back and said, well, what if we did that? How, if we really planted aggressively on these 3 sites, where would we get? The best we could do is about 31% tree cover for one of the sites. So after having quite a bit more pre-development. So what's the future of our canopy? You know, if we look at Charlotte Future, we can see that the pressures that are driving a lot of this are going to are keeping on. The county will have, you know, just under 1.5 million by 2040. We have adding something like 19,000 people annually. The city of Charlotte's expected to have almost 1 million inhabitants by 2026, right? So that pressure is not going to change. And if I run out the business as usual scenario, we can anticipate, even with our rules and the way that they're followed right now, that by 2040, we're going to be something below 35% overall tree canopy. 35. What does that mean? Well, it's pretty far from 50. Davy Resource Group came to the same conclusion, that by 2040, we would anticipate having about 35% canopy. This would result in a 25% reduction in the air cleaning ability of trees, 25 in carbon storage, essentially pulling carbon greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere, and a 31% loss of stormwater management that would need to be replaced with expensive gray infrastructure. When we go back to this plot of where things are, at 35%, we can anticipate almost a 2-degree hotter across the city. And those neighborhoods will slide along that plot. So it's going to be much higher. And that's even before we start to consider the heat that's coming from climate change. That's just the ground that we have laid for climate change to play out on. So what are other cities doing about this? The data is hard to get. I have just a little bit, but one of them is very powerful. Francine Romero is a city councilman in San Antonio, Texas, and also an urban planner. And just in 2021, she did a great comparison of Charlotte and San Antonio. And there, they've got much tougher rules. San Antonio requires developers save 35% of a property's tree if they're building single-family homes, and 40% if it's multifamily or commercial project. That's far exceeds what we're doing here. The city also has basic canopy requirement, meaning that if developers would have to add trees, even if there weren't ones on site already. Her conclusion is while Charlotte benefits from public recognition of the problem and adequate resources, its regulations are weak, lacking a logical connection to aspirational outcomes like 50 by 2050. I find that San Antonio's strict regulations may have stabilized loss rates, while Charlotte's weaker rules have not. These are Veronica Westendorf, recently minted PhD out at the university, surveyed a bunch of cities, and this is just a sampling of other cities that actually have urban heat as a metric of performance for their planning departments, and a series of strategies they can use to start offsetting those. I mean, our city must be called out for having our strategic energy action plan, which is fantastic. It's a bit derivative compared to sort of the big things that are happening in our city right now. So my conclusions after this time, I think all facts are friendly, and we know these things are coming down the pike, and we have evidence of that. And it's up to us to start to think about how do we build in resilience to these systems so that we can endure extreme heat events, weather changes, and maintain the best health for our citizens as possible, environmental health. And I can say that while we are lucky for the Southeast in having some tree tools, they're weak and they're not used to full effect. All right. And this article came out a few weeks ago, written by Gavinoff, that found that the mitigation money that we've been collecting from different developers, half has gone unspent over years. And that's sort of killer. If you, today's dollar in the bank buys a lot less real estate than it did 4 and 3 years ago. And we've just sat on that somehow. Additionally, the places where we bought it have been on the outsides, and it's been taking away tree canopy. Normally, when you have a mitigation bank and you pay a fee in lieu, that money should be used to replace trees in the locale where they're removed, so those people can still enjoy the benefits of trees. But we've been using it, when we've used it at all, to buy already existing trees on the outskirts of the city where they have the most trees already. And this is big news for me, is we can't plant our way out of this dilemma. Tree Charlotte's mission is all about planting trees. They do not have a mission that's about saving trees. And we can't plan our way out, which I hope I've proved you. So emphasis needs to shift to retaining the existing trees. That's the best thing that we can do. Thank you.
Dr. Schumer, thank you very much for the presentation. Kind of speaking for all of us, I know that kind of on a certain level, we're aware of the issue, right? But I don't think any of us have seen it quite in this much depth and with this much detail. I'd love to open it up to not just have some, again, knowing that we have some planning staff members here that I think are very interested in this presentation. So kind of just open up, first come, first serve, guys.
So that conclusion that you drew earlier with the heat mapping study, the 2-degree prediction is not with climate change, but with climate change, any idea what our current predictions are, or what 10 degrees? So it's an extra 2 degrees on top of 10 degrees, or?
Being scholarly, I try not to guess, right? It's likely that we've got a multiplier effect. We've seen that in places like Houston and Austin, where you've got heat coming through, and that's bad enough. And then when you add the impervious surfaces, I mean, the poster child for this is Seattle and Portland during their heat dome. During their heat dome events, Seattle, I know, lost over 100 people in that week because they've got less trees than we do. That people there, a lot of them don't have air conditioners, and when that heat dome lodged over there and stayed, this is just a meteorologic phenomena, right? You know, and it's one of these things, kind of like 100-year flood zones. You know, why are we getting repeat 100-year floods when it's not 100-year, right? We're getting these new weather anomalies, which are consistent with climate change. We knew it was going to be weird, right? But it created an effect that was far worse than it would have been. So it remains to be seen. And unfortunately, I think we'll find out.
Anybody else, questions, comments?
This is Commissioner Gaston. Mine is more of a comment. Watching this presentation, I've heard about the trees and all of that. I just found it was so interesting that the places within our city that have the least amount of trees, like the urban areas or the areas that are currently gentrifying, so they have higher heat, which raises their bills. So they're spending more of the money for the less amount of money that they have. They don't have the ability to take care of the trees that they have because of the cost associated with trees. So trees fall or they're not planted or whatever. And it just seems like it's such a cycle. That's just another thing that impacts areas, and that, you know, we need to take care of those areas, and we need to add more trees to those areas. And maybe there should be a focus. I think Tree Charlotte is working on something in that area, but it's never going to be enough to do that. So I just think it's quite interesting. Just another thing. Thank you.
You're very perceptive. There's 5 more slides that I could show you if you wanted to. So we did a specific look at the combination of canopy and equity, and found that the areas in the city right now that have the least amount of tree cover are the ones that were redlined back in the 30s. So that's a legacy of disinvestment in neighborhoods that manifests itself right now in those areas having less trees and therefore being hotter. I mean, you know what I need to do is to highlight those neighborhoods that are on the hot end of that plot and say, which one of these, how many of these were red line neighborhoods, right? Now, there's another piece of work that I didn't bring because it's its own little world in itself, but we were able to, myself and promising undergrad student, Alessandra Poole, were able to work with the Revolution Park neighborhood about 3 years ago. And Tree Charlotte had this observation that some of the neighborhoods that could use trees the most were not taking advantage of these tree giveaways and even offers to put in trees and pay for maintenance over a series of years, right? And why was that? We were able to go in and work with 19 households in Revolution Park. We did two things. Of those 19 households, we measured every single tree. Well, the NC State Forestry Department measured every single tree on that land and assessed its condition, age, condition, stuff like that, species. And then Alessandra and I went around and asked people what they thought about trees. And the hypothesis was maybe people in these neighborhoods don't realize all the good that these trees do for them. No. The results came back in is that people love the trees, but they were expensive to maintain. They were fearful of that. This neighborhood does have some big old trees and seniors aging in place, and people are very worried about trees falling over and wrecking their house. And there's a lot of confusion about if we make this place nice, is that going to attract gentrification, right? So there's a lot of challenges to replanting trees, even when we give them away. And their ideas are completely backed up by the facts. A whole third of the trees that we measured needed removal or serious care, all right? And if anybody's had tree work done, that starts at about $3,000 and goes up. We estimated for all the 224 households in that neighborhood that they would each on average have to spend a full third of their annual income just to maintain trees. Now, this story has a sunny ending in that Tree Charlotte, now I was unable to, it's not in Tree Charlotte's wheelhouse to do this sort of a thing, but for this neighborhood, Tree Charlotte went back and got a grant from Duke, and they went in and handled all the tree removal and pruning for the households that had participated in the program and invested more than $45,000 in that neighborhood to take care of their trees. The idea being, and if they took one out, they had to replace it. And with well-maintained trees, we have a chance of stopping that erosion of canopy. So, in my perfect world, if I couch this in microeconomic speak, right? These trees are producing these common goods for the city. We all get to enjoy. They're boosting our real estate values. They're attracting new employers and new talent, right? They're cleaning our air. They're making it cooler than most of our other southeastern partners, right? Other cities, right? But all the costs are borne privately. Each person has to rake those leaves, has to maintain that tree, and they're providing public goods, but they pay for it all. So I can see why it's not exactly a good deal. And in my perfect world, if we took that ecosystem service balance sheet to say, these trees are producing this sort of quality of life for our city, maybe there needs to be a little money coming back to those people to keep their trees and keep them in good shape. It would help us all.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Lisa, do you want to say something? Again, I think that was very, very informative. That last point about the equity component of it, I think, was something that we were all looking for as well. Is kind of how all of this ties back in. Obviously, one of Charlotte's identities is our tree canopy, right? And we've been fortunate in some previous presentations. We've had the urban forester in here. Like I said, we've had some land conservation groups, and I think the takeaway is that everyone's trying. right? But how can we get this done as efficiently as possible? And I think it takes a team. It takes, everyone working together. And to that point, we really appreciate this. I think, yeah, go for it, Dan.
Sorry. I'm just curious, in talking about maintenance of the trees and kind of the care and the fear of them falling. I mean, I'm sure almost all of us live in an area where, any given summer storm, you can probably drive within a mile or two of your home and see, at least one major tree has fallen. And in a lot of cases, at least, thinking specifically of like Dilworth or Queens Road West, if you're a private citizen, you actually don't have the right to maintain or touch those trees. They're controlled, my understanding is, by the city. So are those trees falling, and are we losing those trees? Now, again, I know Queens Road West is probably not at a huge risk of losing its canopy as compared to a lot of other areas, but are we losing those trees because they're not being well maintained, or are the majority of those trees that you see in like Myers Park, Eastover, Queens Road West, are those needing to come out? And because we're obviously all being impacted from a fear standpoint by these events, right? It's not as if there's a fear that trees are going to fall, but it never happens. It happens, and you usually see, some, corner of somebody's house has been kind of crushed by one of those large trees. And I'm just curious, obviously as private citizens can't necessarily influence that, but what more needs to be done with those larger trees to kind of maintain them, or what more could be done to keep that from happening?
Great question, and it demonstrates like some of you actually can really see this happening in real time. So first point of clarification is the vast majority of trees are on private property, and you could maintain them or take them out. Only a percentage, I think, out of the millions of trees that we have, I think the city has mapped like 200,000. So that would put it at like 18% of the trees or something like that would be there for the city. Now, all these cases we don't have a strategy. We're reactive, right? So we have a bunch of trees that were planted at roughly the same time when these neighborhoods gone up. You would call this an even age forest, right? So we don't have sort of what might be a much healthier system, with trees of various stages all coming up to assume canopy when it's their time. We have a bunch of old trees, and the city, if it can identify things, or if people call in, I need some maintenance done, the city reacts as well as it can. But there's no strategy to replace those, right? Myers Park has approached me and said, we realize we're over leveraged on big trees, and we don't, which means that something like a Hugo that hit an 83 can come through and take it out, and you would just lose the character. There's currently no strategy and no guidance for landowners or just homeowners really to what their tree should look like, where they should be, what ages should they be, right? And I would love to start modeling the new UDO. I think the UDO has been, there's a lot of subtleties. It's a complicated document, right? And when I'm at a cocktail party and we're talking trees, that everybody says, oh, the UDO says I can't touch my tree. And it's just not so. There are some rules, which is great and important. But I think there's some room built in there to do a better job. Now, if they would take the next step, and because that's the secret sauce of the UDO is that small area planning, right? So they're saying, listen, we have these neighborhood types which really leverage their trees. I haven't seen the next step there to say, how are we going to keep that neighborhood with that sort of character over time, especially if it's top loaded with a bunch of trees that are all probably going to die within the next 20 years, right? Because they're all 80 years old now. These are really great questions that we ought to have a plan for. I know that urban forestry, it's got a planning component, it's got a maintenance component, and they're perennially underfunded. I know that this year they brought on new people, they got a big grant to do with it, and unfortunately, there's not a lot of transparency with how they're spending their money, what their plans are. And so I think to your point, it would be great to understand, if we have this character, this cultural character of the city, and we have all these old trees and we don't have enough over here, what's our strategy to get it back? Because I think it's missing.
Thank you.
Dr. Shoemaker, thank you so much
Thank you
again.
so much.
One last question. We asked this of anybody that presents. Are you okay if we circulate this presentation afterwards?
I am okay with that.
There are several commissioners that were not able to join us, and I'd love them to see it.
That's quite all right.
Excuse me. All right, moving on. Kathy, I believe we just have the community area planning update, and that's the last thing on our agenda this evening.
Yeah, I just have a few updates for you. You all had, as part of the commission meeting a week or so ago, you had a pretty comprehensive update on where we are with community area planning, that the policy map, revised policy map and policy manual were released on the 12th for comment. Those will be open for comment until June 12th. And about map changes overall around 6%. There was about 6% revision to the map. A couple other things that I wanted to highlight. So far in that week or so, we've received 8 comments, both mapping comments and manual comments. Also, last week, we hosted a youth planning day with Generation Nation. That was about 24, 25 students from different high schools. So it was kind of like a planning academy for younger folks, trying to reach that demographic. And we have an upcoming planning academy boot camp on the 27th. So that'll kind of supplement the ongoing piece that we have online. So applications for that opened the same day, I believe, and those will be open through the end of the month. And space is limited. I think at this point, we have about 37, 38 applications, but more to come on that. So that was pretty much everything I had, unless there's any questions. And I also do have flyers about the boot camp if anyone's interested in those.
Thank you. Any questions for Kathy? All right, I think that about wraps us up. Just a quick update. We have coming up in April, we're getting connected. I think we're actually going to have CATS coming to present to us. They're going to be doing some community outreach about, gold line survey. I believe a couple of other things that they just would like an audience with the planning committee. So it looks like that'll be in April. And then tentatively in May, we have Commissioner Gaston presenting to us along with Commissioners Harvey, and McDonald about kind of some boots on the ground. How is the UDO impacting our communities? So again, thank you all. Also, special thank you to Commissioner Winokur for being able to join us. Without you, we would not have had a meeting. So on that note,
Sparkling speakers.
I'll try. On that, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Commissioner Gaston, motion to adjourn.
All right.
I'll second.
Thanks, guys. Have a great evening.